Okay, first I want to talk about mark room itself, the definition of mark room. So there is a zone that is 3 boat lengths in radius here called the zone. So that's actually really big. 3 boat lengths is sometimes bigger than you expect. If you look at the size of these boats, and this is to scale because we measured it out with the hull lengths. So first of all, what is mark room? So in English, the definition is mark room is room for a boat to leave a mark on the required side. Also, now there's 2 parts to this. Room to sail to the mark when her proper course is to sail to it. So that basically means that you get to sail straight to the mark if you have mark room. We'll talk a little bit more detail later, but if this boat gets mark room, they are allowed to sail straight to the mark. And then the second part, room to round or pass the mark as necessary to sail the course without touching the mark. So if the next leg of the course is upwind somewhere, red is allowed to sail to the mark and then around the mark without touching it. These boats are not allowed to stop that. Hopefully I don't offend anyone. I'll try to read this out of the Swedish rule book too. So, märkesplats är plats för en båt att lämna märket på den förskrivna sidan. Dessutom, plats att segla till märket när båtens tillbörliga kurs är att segla nära intill det och plats att runda eller passa märket som krävs för att segla banan utan att beröra märket. It talks about if your proper course is to sail close to it, then you get room to sail around it. It doesn't say you get to sail your proper course. It's just saying that if your proper course is to sail close to the mark, then you get room to sail to it. So I really recommend that you go to Svenska Segelförbundet's website and do the rule course. Klaus has a really good online rule course there. So we know what mark room is. It is just room to sail to the mark and then around the mark is necessary to sail the course. It's not actually a right of way. So if red here is on port, let's say they're sailing in by the lee, yellow here is on starboard, so they're not sailing by the lee, then yellow has right of way over red until red gets mark room, and then yellow still has right of way, but there's a limitation to that right of way. So now yellow has to allow red to sail to the mark and then around the mark as necessary to sail the course. So just to cover this rule 18, the basic rule is that when boats are overlapped, the outside boat gives the inside boat mark room. Then B says that that's established when the first of them reaches the zone. And if it changes, that doesn't matter. The only point that matters is when the first of the boats that the rule applies to enters the zone. So if the overlap is broken or a new overlap is established, that doesn't change anything once they're already inside the zone. Fortunately, there are some parts of this rule which basically just mean be reasonable. So E is my favorite here. If there is reasonable doubt that a boat obtained or broke an overlap in time, it shall be presumed that she did not. So when there's some question in the jury room, when you're at a protest, the jury actually asks you to go back and explain what happened just before. So they go to the last point of certainty. So if you try a stunt where you break the overlap just in time, that actually has to be a very obvious break of the overlap, and it has to happen in enough time that it's undeniable. If you barely make it, then by 18.2e here, it shall be presumed that you did not manage to break the overlap and you still owe that inside boat room. Then F, we'll skip the part about tacking here. If a boat obtained an inside overlap from clear astern and from the time the overlap began, the outside boat has been unable to give mark room, she is not required to give it. So this one I'll draw out. So this is a familiar situation. Maybe you've had a gust of wind coming from behind and you have all these boats. I've drawn a couple of extra boats here. All these boats are coming down together and they're all overlapped. If you are behind here, and then when these boats start getting to the zone, you have an opportunity to sneak in there. Let's say you make it in just as this boat enters, just before this boat enters the zone. I need room on everybody. Well, in a perfect world, you would get room, but 18.2f, this last point in the big Rule 18 for downwind marks, 18.2f says that if there's no way these boats can give you room, you're not allowed to try to take it. So let's call this boat number 1. So boat number 1 now has a lot of work to do, right? They have to allow room for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 boats. They don't need to give room to the 6th that just marginally snuck in there. They probably need to try to give room to them. But by 18.2f, you're not allowed to sneak in there if there's no way you could get room. So the way this usually plays out is that these boats become a big, ugly mess around the mark. And I think I've posted a couple videos of this. So you could either be part of this. I was owed room, and we've got our other boats over here. One of them's not giving room, and other ones, drop their tiller. So you can either become part of this, or you can hang back, slow down a little bit, call it slow down to win. Watch this happen, gauge your speed, and as these boats come clear, maybe one person does a good rounding, but usually most of them get stuck on each other. What you want to do is do a perfect rounding in here. Now, you don't have right of way on anyone because you stayed behind them, slowed down, and just stayed within reach. So you were clear astern on these boats. But if they give you room to sail around the mark, which they usually do, maybe the boats are stuck on each other, maybe they're just yelling and not really thinking about the race, you can usually follow in here and get quite a good, maybe you're not first, but you pass all the boats that had very bad roundings and all the boats that touched each other, and all the boats who forgot to put their centerboard down because they were yelling at someone. So there's actually a lot to gain from holding back, slow down to win, and also they've actually made it an official rule, 18.2F, that you can't go in there anyway. So before I go back and summarize, I just want to make one more point about that, is that if there's this big situation with a whole bunch of boats, as the blue boat, we just found out that it was better to be the boat behind than to be one of the boats in the cluster. So actually, blue has right of way over yellow. Yellow was clear astern when this whole thing happened. So what blue's best move is not to argue and see if you can sail 5 times as fast as everyone in dirty air and try to pass them to leeward. Blue's best move is to say, hey, yellow, I have rights over you. Don't try to go in there. So now yellow has to really slow down. And blue slow down to win. Blue slows down, lets the chaos happen here, and then blue does a nice mark rounding. And then, so these boats are all arguing. Blue does a nice rounding. Yellow does a nice rounding right on blue's transom. And all these boats have trouble. So, if you're the furthest outside boat, or if you're the boat just in behind, it's actually a benefit to disengage, to unlock yourself from this mess, and to just focus on a high quality mark rounding. So I've been to major regattas where there are big clusters, but what you often get at high level events towards the top of the fleet is it's setting up to be a disaster, and then as soon as these boats are in the 3 boat length circle, they yell at all the boats behind, don't go in there, and then they hit the brakes. They slow down like crazy. The inside boat does a nice mark rounding. The next boat does a nice mark rounding. The next boat does a nice mark rounding, and the last boat lines up. And often it gets a little bit slow, and you actually have to luff your sail a little bit here. But the boats exit the mark with the ability to tack. And everyone does a good job, because if you don't do a good job and you end up here, now you are pinned. Blue is preventing yellow from tacking, and green and red and all the other boats are giving yellow a bad job. So it's really important to be able to slow down once you're in the 3 boat length zone, and to do a really nice mark rounding so that you get clean air. And if you don't quite have clean air, at least you can tack without fouling the person behind you. So there's a whole bunch of rules around mark roundings, but what you really need to know is that it pays to do a nice mark rounding. It doesn't pay to fight in the big clump of boats. So to summarize, you don't really need mark room if you're the right-of-way boat, because you already have right-of-way. If you're the give-way boat, you're allowed to sail to the mark, and then around the mark is necessary to sail the course. How do you know who gets mark room? when the first boat enters the circle, it's the boat that is clear ahead or the boat that is overlapped inside. So clear ahead, inside. Multiple overlap, that means that blue has inside overlap on red because green links them. So multiple boats can be overlapped even if the first and last boats aren't overlapped. Once the overlap is established, or the lack of overlap is established, you can't change it. So if blue now catches up to red, red still is allowed mark room, which is to say red is still allowed to sail to the mark and around the mark as necessary to sail the course. Blue can't say, well, they were sailing too slow and I got overlap later on. So again, you have to slow down and let the mark rounding play out properly. So once the overlap or lack of overlap is established at the 3 boat length circle, it's permanent until you have completed the mark rounding. Assuming that fancy things did not happen. So if there's been an overlap the whole way down the leg, and then with a 2 feet left, blue turns and says, no room, and red has a good argument that there may still be room, you assume that blue's fancy move did not break the overlap. Or if they've been sailing like this the whole way down the course, and then in the last second, red just gets inside overlap. If it's not clear that that was that actually happened, you assume that it did not happen. So that's just to try to make things be more clear on the race course. Then the don't be crazy rule, that's when you have 20 boats stacked up. Don't think that you can get room on the entire fleet. Instead, you should slow down to win. And that also goes for if you find yourself in a bad situation, like red here, slow down to win. So either this is going to be a big clump of boats and red's going to actually end up passing a bunch of people, or red only loses 3 boat lengths on the front boat if everyone does a perfect mark rounding. So slow down to win is your best bet. That's what I want to practice in our upcoming practice.